Paris, 1789. A crowd watched King Louis with admiration and cheered him on. The same city, 150 years later, the Nazi flag flew from the Eiffel Tower. This time there was no cheering, only silence. The Vikings razed this city to the ground 9 times. The plague wiped out half the city's population, and the English occupied it for a full 16 years. And by the end of this video, you'll really understand Paris. This is not a city of victories, a city that manages to rise from the ashes time and time again. But it all began on a small island in the middle of the Seine. What if I told you it's the most romantic city in the world, and at the same time the bloodiest in history? Paris has gone down in history as the city of love, the city of light, and the city of revolution. How did Paris manage to survive despite all that? Before we begin, on this channel, I delve into the deep, dark, and forgotten corners of history. If you'd like to shed light on history's dark corners too, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to leave a comment below telling me which city or civilization story you're curious about. Once you've subscribed and turned up the screen brightness, let's get started, because Paris's story is far darker than you might think. This is not the story of Paris's beautiful buildings and romantic streets. It is the story of the rebirth of what was once missing. And you will come to realize that the city's true secret lies not in its beauty, but in its mysterious rooms. However, we cannot help but ask the following question. How did Paris manage to survive despite being subjected to occupation and civil wars for such a long period throughout history? The answer to this question lies in that dark night when a young woman stood face to face with Attila, the Hun emperor. By the time the scene begins, you will view the concept of a miracle in a very different light. Before it became Paris's, it was just a cluster of huts on an island. Around 259 BC, a Celtic tribe known as the Parisi settled on the island now known as Île de la Cité. They were a people who fished and traded on this small island in the middle of the river and controlled the crossings. They weren't building monuments or writing philosophy, they were simply trying to survive. Then, in 52 BC, Julius Caesar and the Roman armies arrived. The Romans captured and razed this settlement as well. With their characteristic efficiency, the Romans rebuilt it on a much grander and more magnificent scale. They named the city Lutetia, a term meaning marshland but not particularly appealing. Lutetia in Rome flourished for 300 years. It was adorned with amphitheaters, baths, and temples, yet no reign lasts forever. In the 3rd century, Germanic invasions began from the north. The townspeople retreated to the island for defensive purposes and built walls. Lutetia had begun to transform into something else. It needed a new name and a new purpose. The 5th century was a period of utter chaos. The Roman Empire was collapsing, and barbarian tribes were dividing Europe up as if it were a prize. In AD 451, Attila and his army were advancing towards Lutetia. The people were in a state of panic and were preparing to abandon everything and flee. Just then, a young woman named Geneviève appeared and changed everything. According to legend, Geneviève persuaded the terrified people to stay in the city and pray rather than flee. And miraculously, or perhaps purely by chance, Attila's army changed course and spared the city. Whether you believe in miracles or not is irrelevant. There is only one certainty: Paris survived. The legend of Geneviève also gave the city what the people needed most: hope. In AD 508, Clovis I, king of the Franks, made Paris his capital. The city took the name Paris's, derived from the Parisi tribe who had lived there thousands of years earlier. From the year 845 onwards, Scandinavian raiders set sail along the River Seine on numerous occasions. Paris paid tribute to get them to leave. This was less a victory than a desperate attempt to buy some breathing space. During the most grueling sieges, a handful of defenders held the bridges against thousands of Vikings. What was truly surprising was not the Viking raid, but what Paris would build in the wake of the destruction. In a moment, as you watch how medieval Paris became the heart of Europe, you will understand the stark difference between collapse and transformation. Construction of Notre Dame Cathedral began in 1163. It took nearly 200 years to complete. Notre Dame represented the pinnacle of Gothic architecture and the cutting edge of its time. Those flying buttresses, rose windows, and vertical lines reaching toward the sky. It was not merely a building, but a declaration of Paris to the world. At the same time, the University of Paris was taking shape. students from all over Europe flocked to the left bank. Since students and professors spoke Latin, this area came to be known as the Latin Quarter. Europe was learning to think in Paris. King Philip II paved the streets with stone, for the first time streets that had previously been nothing but mud. He also commissioned the construction of the Louvre, but not the museum we know today. At that time, it was a fortress with sturdy walls, moats, and a royal treasury. By the 1300s, Paris's population had surpassed 200,000. It was one of Europe's largest fortified cities. In the 14th century, Paris was almost wiped out. First came the famine. In the 1310s, harvests collapsed across Europe. People were dying of starvation in the streets. Then, in 1337, the bloody 100 Years' War broke out between England and France, sparked by a dispute over who should rule France. Yet nothing could be as devastating as what happened in 1348. The Black Death reached Paris. A third of the city's population perished. Corpses were piling up so quickly that they could not be buried. An area remained where the stench of death lingered for years. Entire neighborhoods were completely abandoned. In 1420, whilst the 100 Years' War was still raging, Paris fell into English hands. It remained under foreign rule for 6 years. Then a scene featuring a peasant girl named Joan of Arc from Lorraine was set. He is 7 years old, he cannot read or write, and somehow he managed to persuade the crown prince to give him an army. He lifted the siege of Orléans. The French forces were revitalized. The English believed they had encountered a sorcerer. Joan of Arc, wounded during battle, supported by soldiers, transitioned to coronation scene of Charles VII at Reims Cathedral, royal ceremony, crowns and banners, symbolic turning point, cinematic storytelling composition, ultra-realistic, 8K. She was taken captive in 1430. She was sold to the English. In 1431, at the age of 19, she was burned at the stake in Rouen on charges of witchcraft. Paris was finally liberated in 1436. The war continued until 1453, but for a century, Paris bore the scars of violence, war, and occupation. By the end of this video, you will see that the bloodiest event in Paris's history was not caused by an enemy, but by the problems it faced from within. And when we get to those issues, you'll realize just how weighty a concept the revolution is. But first, how did Paris become Europe's largest city? The 16th century brought both beauty and bloodshed to Paris. King Francis I brought Renaissance culture from Italy to France. He transformed the Louvre from a medieval fortress into a Renaissance palace. He invited Leonardo da Vinci to France. It was there that he realized his artistic potential. Paris is elegant and wise. But in 1562, France was divided between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. Paris became a Catholic stronghold. On 24 August 1572, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre took place. What began as a series of assassinations targeting the Huguenots escalated into a city-wide massacre. Catholic gangs hunted down Protestants in the streets. Within days, thousands of people were killed. The bodies were thrown into the Seine. The violence spread throughout France. It is estimated that 70,000 people lost their lives across the country. One of the darkest moments in Paris's history took place. Just think, in the 17th century, Paris became the symbol of Europe's absolute power. Versailles was built, the Sun King ascended the throne, but beneath that power lay a rotting truth. Before long, you'll see how that explosion turned into the bloodiest revolution in history, and everything you thought you knew about Paris will be turned upside down. The 18th century began with elegance, but ended in bloodshed. Paris was the capital of the Enlightenment. Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot met in cafes and salons. Authority was questioned, and new forms of government were envisaged. But the salons were decaying beneath Paris. The population had exceeded 600,000. The poor lived in squalid, overcrowded neighborhoods. The aristocracy, seemingly oblivious to the destitution around them, wallowed in luxury, just like today. 14 July 1789. The people of Paris stormed the Bastille, a flower-covered fortress. There were only 7 prisoners inside, but it held symbolic significance. The French Revolution had begun, and King Louis XVI was executed by guillotine in January 1793 inches, the square that is now known as the Place de la Concorde. 9 months later, Queen Marie Antoinette met the same fate. The revolution devoured its own children. During the Reign of Terror in Robespierre's time, tens of thousands were sent to the guillotine. Nobles, the bourgeoisie, and even relatively moderate revolutionaries. Blood flowed in the streets of Paris. In 1794, Robespierre himself was sent to the guillotine. France was weary, traumatized, and in search of stability. That stability came in the guise of a Corsican general. Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in 1799 and made Paris the capital of his empire. In 1806, he commissioned the Arc de Triomphe. Construction of the Rue de Rivoli began. He transformed the Louvre into a museum open to the public. The laws established by Napoleon are still in force in European legal systems today, but the stability of the settlement established following the conquest was not to last very long. The Russian campaign of 1812, the defeat at Leipzig in 1813. In 1814, foreign forces entered Paris. Napoleon was deposed. He was exiled to Elba. Following the 100 Days, he was decisively defeated at Waterloo in 1815. Having once been the heart of an empire, Paris now found itself under occupation, humiliated, and facing an uncertain future. At the end of the 19th century, Paris experienced one of the greatest cultural golden ages in history. The Impressionists, the Moulin Rouge, the Eiffel Tower. But immediately after that period, those very same streets were adorned with the Nazi flag. Those very same cafes served German officers. As the minutes go by, you'll realize that Paris's biggest problem isn't the city itself, it's the people who live there. The Belle Époque, or the Beautiful Era. It is generally considered to have lasted from the 1870s to 1914 and marked Paris's cultural golden age. Monet, Renoir, and Degas painted light. The Moulin Rouge opened in 1889. Émile Zola and Victor Hugo described the era in this way. The Eiffel Tower was built in 1889. At first, the Parisians hated it. They dismissed it as a metal monstrosity. Later, it became a symbol of Paris. But in 1914, the First World War broke out, and Paris came under threat as close as 30 miles from the front line. Taxis were used as ammunition depots. The city narrowly escaped destruction. In the 1920s, Paris once again became the cultural capital of the world. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and Picasso were all there. Coco Chanel liberated women from the corset. Then, 14 June 1940, German forces entered Paris. The swastika flew from the Eiffel Tower. For 4 years, cafes and theaters remained open to serve German officers. Jewish Parisians were rounded up. In July 1942, more than 13,000 people were rounded up in the Veldiv Roundup and sent to concentration camps. Very few returned. There was resistance, but there was also betrayal. 25 August 1944. French and American forces entered Paris. General de Gaulle marched down the Champs-Élysées, and Paris was free once more. After the war, Paris was rebuilt from the ashes, not only physically, but also spiritually. Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir met in cafes and pondered what freedom meant in the aftermath of the war. In 1968, workers once again blocked the streets of Paris with barricades. The education system rebelled against authority and traditional power. The Charlie Hebdo attacks in 2015, the November attacks, they claimed the lives of 130 people. Even as Paris lay dying, it fought back. In 2019, as the bell tower collapsed, Notre Dame burned, and the world watched. The 2024 Olympic Games. Paris is once again the host city. Today, Paris is a city of freedoms, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a global tourist destination, and a political capital. But it is also a city grappling with inequalities in prosperity, tensions surrounding migration, and a continuing struggle with its own identity. Paris is not perfect. Its history is steeped in violence, oppression, and deep darkness. Yet, it has given rise to revolutionary ideas about freedom and human dignity. And, for better or worse, Paris has never ceased to fight for these ideals. It was conquered, it was burned, it was occupied, and, as always, it rose again. So, what do you think kept Paris going? Its geography, its culture, or those stylish Parisians? I'll pin the strongest comments from the comments section. If we want to keep the deep, dark, and forgotten stories of these kinds of cities alive, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.